Woods from Tennessee State University, who's given us some information relative to the history of the death penalty in the state of Tennessee. And as we indicated, Dr. Woods, let's see if we can broaden that by giving you an opportunity over the last segment here to sort of bring in as much information you wish to bring in reference to the death penalty, as well as some of the ideas in reference to what people would like to do in reference to the death penalty.
Well, let me start by saying the two large legal issues that have framed the death penalty in recent years have been what we just finished talking about, aggravating factors, guidance for the jury, and that's in place in the 32 or so states that enforce the death penalty. The second large idea that's right on the cusp now, getting debated in the Tennessee legislature, going to be litigated in the U.S. Supreme Court and a lot of other states. We saw it in Oklahoma a few weeks ago, where an inmate sentenced to death in Oklahoma, his appeals ran out, and to carry out the death penalty, they gave him what the lawyers call lethal injection. All of us used to do this by electrocution, the electric chair, or by firing squad, like Utah still invites that, or by poison gas in a gas chamber, which Louisiana has used, California, a few others. In the last 20 years, almost every death penalty state has moved away from electrocution and those old-fashioned methods, I'll call it, because lawyers have been arguing under the 8th Amendment to the Constitution that that manner of execution constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. And basically every state that enforces the death penalty has changed over the last 20 years to say, we'll commit the death penalty carried out by lethal injection. We'll have the inmate, injected with a poison, toxic drug that brings death. Any competent doctor can name 10 drugs or 50 drugs like this in the right quantity. And the problem is, as we witnessed in Oklahoma a few weeks ago, is a competent doctor won't have anything to do with this. Doctors take a Hippocratic oath that they're going to do no harm. So if you're the warden or commissioner of correction in Tennessee or any other state, and you start dialing doctors in Nashville or in Tennessee saying, will you help us carry out this lethal injection? Answer is going to be no across the board. So now if you're the warden, the governor, the commissioner, what do? The legislature and the jury have said this prisoner is to be put to death at midnight tonight. How do you carry that out? Well, it's all dissolved down to the lowest level possible, where what we now have are untrained volunteers who do lethal injections in some states versus basically untrained correctional officers who are recruited to do the lethal injection. And if you're an officer, this puts you in a terrible dilemma. You're working for the state, and the state's saying in so many different levels and ways, we want one of you to step forward and agree to give this guy the injections. And you get Oklahoma, where on the inmate condemned to death, they couldn't find a vein. Just like when I or anybody goes to give blood at the doctor's office, they've got a trained medical technician there or a trained nurse who's going to find the appropriate vein and put that needle into my arm for the purpose of extracting blood. Well, it's the same thing with lethal injection. You're going to inject the drug into a vein to bring about several stages on the way to a few minutes later, lethal state death. None of these people in these 32 states know how to do that. None of them are trained to do it. None of them are medically licensed. So we've got volunteers, amateurs trying to carry out the state law. We don't do this in any other area of the law. We either train people to be correctional or law enforcement personnel or to be lawyers. They have to have licenses. This is the only area where we basically shut our eyes and say, okay, warden, anyway you can do it, you just make him dead. That's not the way the law is supposed to function. And what happened in Oklahoma was they couldn't find a proper vein, or at least the volunteer or untrained person doing it said they couldn't find the proper vein. And the vein they finally, the femoral arteries, veins here in the thigh that they finally used, closed on them after it started, which means the prisoner, he was getting tortured with the drug, but he wasn't getting enough of the drug to die. And finally, after 28 minutes or 38 minutes, I forget which, he died not from the injection, but from a heart attack, probably brought on by the torture. Well, this isn't what the law is supposed to do. And therefore, lots of anti-death penalty lawyers around the country are asking the Supreme Court to look at the Oklahoma-type lethal injection, same thing we use here in Tennessee, and declare it to violate the Constitution. I think they're probably going to win those cases. And therefore, Tennessee legislature, this term of the legislature, introduced a bill saying if lethal injection doesn't work or isn't tried or is ruled unconstitutional by the courts, we can revert back to using the electric chair. Well, so it's uncertain what's going to happen with the Tennessee death penalty and other states as well. And if they do revert back to the electric chair, now they're going to face all the court precedents and arguments from 20 years ago that the electric chair violates the Eighth Amendment. Plus, they're also going to have the lack of training, a lack of licensing problem again. We don't have licenses for people to carry out an electrocution. Just the opposite. We've got laws saying unlicensed people can't fiddle with electricity and bring that about. So lethal injection, electrocution, either one, we've got to figure out a way to, if we're going to do it, which I'm opposed to, but if we're going to do it, the legislature mandates it and the jury agrees to it, we've got to find out a way to do it in a professional, licensed way, and I don't think that's going to happen, at least not anytime soon. I think defense lawyers like myself strategize about this all the time. Prosecutors strategize about it on the other side. I think most of the public, and it's clear in polling data, would probably prefer life in prison without parole. If I'm a heinous murderer who has hurt innocent people, killed them, society's got to do something to me. One option they have that avoids all these legal problems is life imprisonment without parole. However long I live, I'm going to spend the rest of it locked in a 6-by-8 cell at the main prison here in Tennessee. Prosecutors face a lot of political pressure to argue for a death penalty instead of that. They face a lot of political media pressure. You got to look tough on crime. Well, I want to be safe just like everybody else. I don't want to be a victim. I do want prosecutors to do a good, competent, professional job. And the way they could protect me is life in prison without parole. And that doesn't even get to the issue of the 4% or the 8%. The two opposite sides argue about which is accurate. The 4% or 8% of people who are on death row around America that should not be there. Whatever number it is, it's too high. All these problems, they're not being addressed in a professional manner as part of the problem.
Moratorium, Dr. Woods, over the last minute and a half we have. What are the possibilities of us simply deciding to end the death penalty in the United States?
I think that's coming, number one, because almost every one of our religious faiths ban the death penalty. There are few that don't, but almost the vast majority of Protestant religions, the Catholic Church, most religious faiths all our listeners have ever heard of oppose the death penalty. So there's this wide foundation in our society in opposition to the death penalty. On the other hand, some people want to be, well, we all want to be protected, and they want to punish wrongdoers. I think, again, that's true of all of us. And I'm saying there are alternatives to the death penalty that will accomplish that. I think those two influences together, the religious point of view and the practical point of view, will lead eventually to the banning, to the abolition of the death penalty. In the meantime, however, in various states around the country, especially Texas, the leader in executing people in the last 20 years, there are actual people being confronted from the commissioner to the warden to the governor to the lawyers to the courts about what are we going to do about this week, about this execution scheduled in Texas, how we're going to carry out a lethal injection, and there are no agreed upon answers to how to do that, which is a third reason, a third area of pressure, I think, that's eventually going to lead to abolition of the death penalty. The fourth reason I think it'll eventually be stopped is we do make mistakes. 4% of the time or 8% of the time, we've convicted people of the death penalty when in fact they were innocent and should never have been convicted of anything.
Let me thank you, Dr. Woods, for bringing by that excellent information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.